30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started. Okay, Anilji, we're live, so you can turn on your video and get started.
Jai Bhim, everyone. Welcome to 130th Dr. Baba Saheb B.R. Ambedkar birth anniversary celebration. I am glad that many organizations have come together for this celebration, including AIC, HFHR, IAMC, DSF, India Civil Watch International, and SAHI. Ambedkar International Center USA, an Ambedkarite organization in the USA to fight for equality and justice for the downtrodden. HFHR, Hindus for Human Rights, committed to fighting casteism, Brahminism, and fighting against people who are spreading hatred in the name of religion, especially the current Indian regime, and fighting for fundamental human dignity and rights. IAMC, Indian American Muslim Council, for fighting against people who are spreading hatred in the name of religion, fighting for peace, justice, and pluralism. DSF, Dalit Solidarity Forum, fighting for Dalit rights. India Civil Watch International, fighting for Bhima Koregaon victims and victims of high-handedness of the Indian government. Students Against Hindutva Ideology, young generation from India based in US who recognize the spread of Hindutva ideology on the campuses in the United States and standing up against that ideology. I am very happy that all these organizations with their different ideologies have come together to fight Hindutva, casteism, and religious extremism that India is moving towards, to protect Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's constitution, the Constitution of India, which strives for equality and justice and fraternity, equality in the order of social, economical, and political. The current situation in India does not bode well for the people of India. As Dr. Ambedkar had said, the constitution can be very good, but if the people who implement the constitution are not good, then any good constitution can become a bad constitution. Judiciary has been co-opted. 2 Supreme Court Chief Justices have been appointed to Rajya Sabha, the upper house of parliament, and a governor of a state within a year of their retiring. This has never happened before. The cases are frequently posted to the judges of the government's choice. One of these judges had pronounced judgment on the Babri Masjid, handing it over to Hindus based on faith rather than treating it as a land dispute case. Election Commission has become partisan. Not once the Election Commission has ruled against Prime Minister Modi or the BJP chief for any violation of Model Code of Conduct, despite flouting it many a times. The election dates are often decided by the government, and Election Commission follows the dictates. The Election Commission has argued in the Supreme Court in favor of anonymous funding of political parties, which is nothing but a bribe. The press freedom is at the lowest. The press reporters reporting anything that shows the government in poor light are slapped with sedition cases, raided by various tax authorities, slapped with multiple court cases, sending clear message to fall in line. The sedition and UAPA laws are being applied to hound political opponents. Human rights activists like in Bhima Koregaon case are behind bar for over 2 years, including Dr. Anand Teltumbde, who was put in jail on 14th April and is still in the jail without bail. Kabir Kala Manch artists are put in jail for singing thought-provoking songs. Opposition governed states are not being provided the vaccines in proportion to their population nor the positivity rates. COVID situation in India is extremely grim. Politics being played in the distribution of vaccine and trying to treat it as a photo opportunity by calling vaccine diplomacy, by giving the vaccines to other countries. Government of India is clearly neglecting poor people of India. Whenever there is a foreign aid, as I read somewhere, when you give a foreign aid, you take from the poor of your country and give it to the rich of the other countries. It's not a photo of Mr. Modi. The vaccine situation needs to be improved. COVID situation needs to be governed, and this is the governance that we need. Atrocities against scheduled caste, erstwhile untouchables are discouraged or put in jails for choosing the religion of their choice. Many states have made laws to ban religious conversions. Supreme Court, scheduled caste grooms and husbands are killed for marrying outside their caste. This is called honor killings. Scheduled castes are beaten up for entering temples, for polluting them. Muslims and Christians, any Muslim youth traveling with other religions girl are beaten up and often lynched. Nuns traveling in trains are harassed and by accusing them that they are coercing religious conversion. Many BJP ruled states have framed laws disallowing religious conversions. With that, so to say, just as a conversion breaker, let me invite Mrs. Rama Teltumde, wife of Dr. Anand Teltumde, who was arrested on 14th April last year. Rama Teltumde has been involved in campaigning for justice and freedom for her husband, Professor Anand Teltumde, and for 16 other accused in the Bhima Koregaon case. She is also the granddaughter of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Prior to Professor Teltumde's arrest, Mrs. Teltumde, a homemaker, has supported his work and activism throughout his professional life and helped shape the careers of her two daughters. Welcome, Mrs. Rama Teltumde.
जय भीम, नमस्कार। आज मुझे यहाँ बुला के इनवाइट किया है, उसके लिए मैं आप सबके बहुत आभारी हूँ। भीमा कोरेगांव की केस ये एक दंगल थी। मनुवादियों ने दलितों पे किया हुआ हमला था। 1 जनवरी 2018 को ये दंगल हुई थी। पहले इसके बारे में सच बताया गया था। बाद में 8-10 दिन के बाद इसका पूरा नैरेटिव ही चेंज हो गया और ये दंगल को माओइस्ट और नक्सलाइटों ने अरेंज किया था, ऐसे कहा गया था। ये दंगल जो मनुवादियों को बचाने के लिए कहा गया था, उसके लिए जो अरेस्ट हुए उनको प्राइम मिनिस्टर असैसिनेशन के चार्जेस भी लगाए गए थे और ये दंगल भड़काने के भी चार्जेस थे। पूरे देश से 16 लोगों को 2 साल में अरेस्ट किया गया और उनको यूएपीए के अंतर्गत जेल में डाला गया। आनंद जी और हम लोग के घर पे रेड हो गई। जब हम घर में नहीं थे और बाद में हमें ये टीवी से पता चला कि हमारे घर पे रेड हुई है। हमें मालूम ही नहीं था कि इतने बड़ी साजिश रची जा रही थी और आनंद को कभी जेल में जाना पड़ेगा। ये हमारे लिए बहुत ही क्लेशदायक था। बाद में तब से अब तक हमारे कोर्ट कचहरियों के चक्कर चल ही रहे हैं। आनंद ने पहले एफआईआर स्क्वैश करने के लिए कोर्ट में ट्राई किया। जब वो रिजेक्ट हो गई तो उन्होंने बेल के लिए अप्लाई किया। सेशन कोर्ट से हाई कोर्ट तक और हाई कोर्ट से सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक हमने बेल के लिए अप्लाई किया, लेकिन बेल नहीं मिलने से आनंद को 14 अप्रैल 2020 को सरेंडर होना पड़ा। आनंद की उम्र का ख्याल किया तो उन्हें पहले से ही अस्थमा की बीमारी है और ये एज में उनको जेल में जाना और ये सब कष्ट सहन करना उनके लिए एक बहुत ही कष्टदायक है। आनंद जी गरीब फैमिली से आते हैं। उन्हें दलित माइनॉरिटीज और आदिवासियों से काम करना अच्छा लगता है। वो उनके हक के लिए झगड़ते हैं, उनको मेन स्ट्रीम में लाने के लिए उनके लिए काम करते हैं और ये उनका कर्तव्य है, ऐसे भी वो मानते हैं। आनंद ने अब तक किताबों में या आर्टिकल्स में या स्पीच में ये लोगों के लिए ही लिखा है और उनको मदद करना अपना कर्तव्य समझ के ये सब कुछ करते हैं। यहाँ मुझे बाबा साहब ने अपने लोगों के लिए एक कहा हुआ सेंटेंस याद आता है। एक सेंटेंस याद आता है, गलत का विरोध जमकर कीजिए, चाहे वो राजनीति हो या समाज कार्य हो। इतिहास टकराने वाले का ही लिखा जाता है। उसके बाद आनंद जेल जाने के बाद यूएपीए के अंतर्गत उन्हें अटक हो गई। यूएपीए एक ऐसा इनह्यूमन कानून है कि 180 दिन तक उसमें चार्जशीट दाखिल होती है। मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम चार्जशीट लास्ट डे में यानी 180 डे पे ही दायर होती है। आनंद के बारे में भी वैसे ही हुआ, लास्ट डे। बेल यूएपीए के अंदर बेल नहीं मिलती है। बेल के बाद अप्लाई करने के बाद आपको मालूम नहीं कब आपको बेल मिलेगी। इंसान को तब तक जेल में ही पड़ा रहना पड़ता है। आनंद को और अन्य लोगों को जो यूएपीए के अंदर अटक किया है, उनको अर्बन नक्सल कह के भी बोला गया है। हमारे यहाँ जो पिछले साल से कोविड का जो दौर चल रहा है, उसमें बहुत सारे कैदियों को रिहा किया गया, लेकिन उसमें जो रेपिस्ट थे, क्रिमिनल्स थे या मर्डरर्स थे, उनको भी रिहा किया। लेकिन दूसरे बाजू में ये जो ह्यूमन राइट्स एक्टिविस्ट थे, जो उम्र से 60 साल के ऊपर भी थे और जिनको खुद की बीमारियां भी थी, उनको कुछ भी रिलीफ नहीं मिला। वो अब भी जेल में ही पड़े हैं। ये ह्यूमन राइट्स डिफेंडर्स ये सब सहन करके वहां जेल में रह रहे। आनंद की उम्र 70 साल की है, उनको अस्थमा की बीमारी है। अब जेल में उन्हें डायबिटीज और ब्लड प्रेशर का भी हेल्थ प्रॉब्लम शुरू हुआ है। उनको लास्ट टाइम कोविड भी हुआ था और उसमें हम कोर्ट में भी गए थे, लेकिन कोर्ट का डिसीजन आने के पहले वो अच्छे हो गए थे। अभी भी सेकेंड कोविड का बहुत ही दौर चल रहा है। हमें उनके हेल्थ की बहुत ही चिंता है। हमारी कानून की लड़ाई अभी भी जारी है। आनंद का सेशन कोर्ट में केस चल रहा है। अभी इसी साल वॉशिंगटन पोस्ट में आर्सेनेल कंसल्टेंसी का रिपोर्ट आया है। ये रिपोर्ट से हमें बहुत सारी उम्मीदें हैं। ये रिपोर्ट कहता है कि रोना विल्सन के कंप्यूटर को हैक करके उसमें नेटवायर मालवेयर डाल के उसमें घुसखोरी की गई थी और उसमें बाद में 10 लेटर भी डाले गए थे। और रोना विल्सन के अरेस्ट होने के बाद वही कंप्यूटर से वो 10 लेटर निकाल के ये सब लोगों को जो अभी यूएपीए के अंदर अटक है, उनको वही एविडेंस मान के उनको जेल में भेजा गया। रोना विल्सन का कंप्यूटर पिछले 22 साल से कॉम्प्रोमाइज कर रहे थे हैकर्स। ये भी ये रिपोर्ट में कहा गया है। रिपोर्ट में ये भी बताया गया है कि ये लेटर्स एक एक करके कौन से दिन और कौन से समय डाले गए थे। ये रिपोर्ट से हमें बहुत सारी उम्मीद है, क्योंकि ये रिपोर्ट एविडेंस पे ही क्वेश्चन मार्क खड़ा करता है। और मेरा मानना है कि जिस एविडेंस के आधार पे आनंद और अन्य लोगों को जेल में भेजा गया है, वो एविडेंस पे ही अब सवाल खड़े किए हैं। तो ये लोगों को एटलीस्ट बेल मिलना चाहिए और एविडेंस की जांच होनी चाहिए। और ये एविडेंस किसने प्लान किए और इसके पीछे कौन है, उसको सामने लाना चाहिए। मुझे अब ऐसे लगता है कि हमें इस रिपोर्ट से थोड़ा कुछ फायदा हो सकता है। अंत में मुझे कहना है कि भारत एक क्रिटिकल स्टेज से गुजर रहा है, जहां लोगों के इंडिविजुअल फ्रीडम पे ही हमला हो रहा है। मेरी आपसे एक विनंती है, आप आनंद जी के फ्लिम्सी एविडेंस देखिए और आर्सेनेल रिपोर्ट पढ़िए और खुद डिसाइड कर दीजिए। मुझे आशा है कि ये सब पढ़ने के बाद हम अपने पॉलिटिकल डिफरेंसेस एंड आइडियोलॉजिकल डिफरेंसेस अलग रखकर ये लोगों के फ्रीडम के लिए एकजुट से काम करेंगे। मेरा मानना है कि यही डॉक्टर बाबा साहेब अम्बेडकर जी को सच्ची ट्रिब्यूट होगी। वंस अगेन मुझे सब ऑर्गेनाइजर्स का शुक्रिया अदा करना है कि उन्होंने मुझे यहाँ बुला के मुझे यहाँ 2 शब्द कहने को।
Thank you, Mrs. Rama Teltumre. We are with you in this fight with Dr. Anand. Government is clearly fabricating the evidence, planting the evidence, planting the software on the phones so that they can plant the evidence as well as keep track of all the activities. Individual freedom is really at stake. And as they say, let's make sure that we stand up against the current regime before they come after each of us. Thank you very much, Mrs. Rama Teltumre. Our next speaker is Banjyotsna Lahiri. Banjyotsna Lahiri is a senior researcher at Center for Equality Studies. She completed her PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, the university which is despised by the current regime for spreading secularism. She has also taught at Ambedkar University, Jamia Millia Islamia University, and Lady Shri Ram College of Delhi University. Lahiri has written extensively about her friend Umar Khalid, who has been incarcerated by the Indian state in its ongoing witch hunt against activists in the wake of the Delhi riots incited by the members of the ruling party. Welcome, Banjyotsna Lahiri.
Thank you, Anil. It's really, I won't say pleasure, it's a great honor to be here today, speaking along with Ramaji and Rajmohan Gandhi, sir. And it's really, I mean, we are fighting in India currently, we are fighting every day millions of struggles for justice. And in that, of course, both Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar are one of our constant sources of inspiration and pillars of strength. And every day now it's time that we look back to their words, their thoughts, and strengthen our struggle with their vision of justice, their vision of equality. And this has been the case that, looking back at what Dr. Ambedkar had said extensively from the time when students erupted in protest after the suicide of Rohit Vemula. The students came out in streets in large number, and at that point itself, it was once again extensively the words of Dr. Ambedkar and his vision for justice, social justice, gender justice. It started making a lot of sense to a lot of people afresh, and people again started reading Dr. Ambedkar extensively. Right now, after like last year when the anti-CAA protest started, one of the most beautiful things about the anti-CAA protest was this, the exchange of ideas, and extensive debates, discussions that took place in those protests. Because those protests, if you remember, most of the protests after Shaheen Bagh protest started, there were 24/7 protests. So the protest would take place throughout the day and night, and people, women, old people, children would come out of the mohallas and would gather around. And in all those protests, people from outside will also come and participate. The beauty of the anti-CAA protests was that they were not just events. One event of where someone is coming and we are protesting against someone. It became an ongoing, beautiful spaces of where a lot of ideas were exchanged. A lot of people with different ideas came there, participated, And people talked about citizenship. What is citizenship? What is, nationalism? What is the freedom that we are actually fighting for? How NRC and CA are going to destroy fundamentally the essence of our constitutions, how they are absolutely not just unconstitutional but anti-constitutional laws. And those discussions, debates, uh, the ideas of, once again, Dr. Ambedkar was central, because we were all fighting to, not just preserve our constitution, because that was never the idea. The idea was to push the limits of democracy, to push the limits of constitution, and for that also, uh, Dr. Ambedkar in particular was someone who did not limit his thoughts just in the drafting of the constitution, but he also shows the immense possibility of the Indian constitution. And those spaces of the anti-CAA protest actually became a very battleground of ideas, where people were constantly debating, discussing. And I would actually remember the anti-CAA protests for the beauty of those exchange of ideas that were. Of course, after the anti-CAA protest, we saw that the protests were called off because the people who were sitting there were responsible citizens, and because the pandemic started and social distancing norms were to be enforced, and therefore people voluntarily withdrew the protests, and they were uh, the protests were temporarily called off. But what happened next was, when the backlash from the state happened, these protests were, because while the protests were going on, the Delhi pogrom had already taken place. It was a horrible 5 days of violence, where particularly the Muslim community were targeted. Their lives, livelihoods, places of worship were particularly targeted. And in that, the lives that were lost, more than 50 lives that were lost, most of them were Muslims, and yes, many of them were Hindus too. Like it happens in any kind of this kind of bloodbath, that the local people of the Northeast Delhi lost their lives, and there was immense loss of livelihoods, uh, loss of lives, and the entire that space of Northeast Delhi was completely vitiated. Now, of course, that kind of a pogrom required investigation by the police, a fair investigation by the police, and the people who were responsible for instigating, for participating in the riots, obviously should have been brought to book, right? Uh, and they should have been arrested. But the role of the police right from the beginning was dubious there, because while the riots were going on, at the beginning, the police were blocking, instead of stopping the riots, they were blocking ambulances and places, especially like a place like a ghetto, which is completely surrounded, and people are being killed, people are being injured in between, in those enclosed spaces. They need to come out, and ambulances needed to go inside, so much so that some people at the middle of the night had to run to the High Court, and in an emergency petition, they had to file a petition to ensure the movement of ambulances and a fair role of the police. After the High Court intervened, the police actually kind of got back to their duty, and in no time, the riots were actually controlled. So had they done this before, 3 days before, actually this kind of loss of lives wouldn't have happened. But after that, while the pandemic had struck and while we were in a lockdown, what we saw was a massive witch hunt that started in the name of investigating the riot. I mean, if I just can quickly tell you that just before the pandemic, like we closed our lockdown for the pandemic, uh, towards the end of February, there was one parliament session that was held, where this issue about the Delhi riots were very strongly raised by the opposition parties, and the Home Minister was supposed to address the concerns, that why did the police fail, and why this kind of a huge pogrom could take place in the capital city. Now, from that day onwards, the Home Minister was pretty clear that no, this was the pogrom was not the focus. What was the focus was the anti-CAA movement, and it tried to show that as if the anti-CAA movement led to the riots, and that the anti-CAA movement was actually the run-up to the riots, and the movements which were completely peaceful, the movements that has been the anti-CAA movements, the dharnas that were going on for months by that time, completely peacefully. People were gathering, and like I said, they were just exchanging ideas, discussing citizenship and the probable the resistance to the assault on citizenship through CAA. That was seen as the conspiracy, and the Home Minister kind of laid out a blueprint that like this is what they are going to pursue. And during the pandemic, when the citizens were pretty responsible in calling off the protest and in putting a temporary hold on the ongoing protests, the state was not resting. The state took advantage of the lockdown and started picking up people, mainly students, active students and activists. They started targeting them, and one after the another, and like much like the Bhima Koregaon case, like they learned their lessons from the Bhima Koregaon case, and therefore 2-3 things if I can just tell you about the case and the similarities with the Bhima Koregaon case here is that the assaulters we all knew. I mean, it's a time of digital devices, and people live stream, people record. There are CCTV cameras installed all over Delhi, so we know how the riots took place. It's no surprise. It's no nothing is secret. We know who instigated. We know who started the instigation. We know who had given call like mullo ko kato jaake. We all know their names. We know their faces, right? We know for months before, during the elections, Delhi elections, who was it who raised the slogans like "Goli maro Salo ko," "Desh ke gaddaro ko goli maro Salo ko," and firing actually took place after that. The violence actually took place after that. We know who said that. Agar matlab if you don't clear the roads, we are not going to listen to the police also. One gentleman, Kapil Mishra, he made this statement in front of the DCP, and in a few hours, that is what happened. The violence broke out. Ragini Tiwari, one woman, she was giving open calls of violence, of mullo ko kato and all that. We know their names, we know their faces, like we knew the names of Sambhaji Bhire and Milind Tekbote, who actually had called for violence in the Bhima Koregaon case, and who were the perpetrators. But similarly, like here, like Milind Tekbote and Sambhaji Bhire were left and they were not arrested. Here also, we saw the same thing. These people were left out, but every person, student activist who was involved in the anti-CAA protest, they were implicated. And one more thing that happened here is that, showcasing, now that all these charge sheets have been filed, we now know that that they are being what the police is showcasing as the terror activity, because this case like Bhima Koregaon is now under UAPA, which is an anti-terror law. What they're showcasing as terror activity, it's not like they're trying to put false evidences. It's not like they're showing that someone was carrying RDX or was trying to do a bomb blast. That things like that we have seen in the past, where false evidences were put in front of on people, and people fought for 20 years, 12 years, 16 years to actually exonerate them or absolve them. No, here they have not done that. Here they have actually criminalized the protest. As evidence, what the police has shown in the charge sheet is that these 5 people came together, they did a meeting, they planned the protest, and all this is shown as terror activity now. So that is like the cause of concern, that just protest, peaceful gathering that is actually ensured, guaranteed in the constitution, is now shown not just as an act of dangerous act of rioting, but it's actually shown as a terror activity. This is where they have taken the case. Just one more point, if I just say and maybe wrap up for now is that Umar got bail in one of the cases that he was booked under very recently, and the judge actually gave a very caustic judgment and criticized this implication of him and found no evidence. But the thing is that actually Umar had just two cases. There are 16 people who are now booked under UAPA, 17 people who are now booked under UAPA in this case. Some of them have 4 cases, some of them had 3 cases, and all of them have got bail from all the cases other than the UAPA cases. Now, other cases, the charge sheet does not say anything different from the UAPA case. Same things the charge sheet say, but they are in jail just because of UAPA, and therefore this draconian law of UAPA is what keeping them inside. But every 15 days they are produced for the extension of their judicial custody, and we meet them in the court, and we see that they are in top of their spirits. They are not broken. They are all of them. They are reading. They are productively thinking, spending their time. Obviously, incarceration of any kind is a very, very painful exercise, but we see them every 15 days. All we can see is that these were activists who are fighting for the constitution, for the country. They were the biggest patriots of the country right now, and they are not broken. That much I can assure you. And the fight will definitely go on.
Thank you, Banjosna, for that forceful narration. What the government is trying to do is the repeat of Gujarat, and they are so proud of that Gujarat model. But we know the Gujarat riots, and those are the same riots they wanted to do repeat in Delhi. It was very heartening when we joined hands with Atlanta Muslim organizations and organized the protest here. It was another heartening when mobs were going to some of the Muslim mohallas, the scheduled caste people, the Sikhs, stopped the people entering the Muslim mohallas. Those were the really heartening scenes that we saw. And like you said, these days everything gets recorded, and some of those recordings were very, very heartening. Humanity was coming alive all over again. This government is so much focused on winning elections, and currently the COVID pandemic, but the Prime Minister is so busy canvassing. You want to win the elections for doing something great, for making the country prosper, be peaceful, and all of that. But the focus is so much that they actually want to make this a Hindu Rashtra. That's their focus. If you look at the current farmers protest, ongoing farmers protest, why farmers have to come out? Because none of these bills are actually going to the parliamentary committee wherein they deliberated, the people are heard, people are consulted. None of that is happening. What we are seeing is a complete murder of democracy, wherein people are not being heard, not being listened to or taken into consideration. The protest, which is a very fundamental part of any democracy, because if government is not listening to you and then you protest, that is also not being allowed. Thank you, Banjosna. With that, I will now invite Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi, the grandson of Rajmohan Gandhi is a historian, biographer, and a research professor at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is also a scholar in residence at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar. Professor Gandhi's books include biographies of M.K. Gandhi, his grandfather, on his father's side, of C. Rajgopalachari, his grandfather on his mother's side, as well as other leaders of freedom movement, including Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and Vallabhbhai Patel. Welcome, Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi.
Thank you, Anilji, very much for these words. Now, this look at ongoing assaults on democracy in India takes on special meaning during Ambedkar Jayanti week. On India's land, in India's air, in the Indian mind, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar represents democracy. As we look at him, his face slowly turns, we find, into the Constitution of India and what that Constitution guarantees: liberty of expression, the equal and precious worth of every human being, and more. For me to speak on a panel along with Ambedkar's granddaughter, Rama Teltumbde is a message in itself. It tells you that along with countless others, Ambedkar's granddaughter and Gandhi's grandson are deeply worried about India's democracy. With the two of us on this occasion is the close friend of Umar Khalid, Parajyosna Lahiri. The appearance of the three of us tells you that today's struggle for democratic rights has a living bond with India's historic and continuing struggles for freedom, justice, and harmony. Now with COVID, a tough struggle for survival merges with these other struggles. I think it can be said that three population groups in India, Dalits, Adivasis, and Muslims, are jointly the equivalent of America's blacks. They are India's oppressed. One reason why I respect Ramaji's imprisoned husband, the brilliant Dr. Anand Teltumbde, is his work to unite these different groups. The very idea of India is under attack today. The preamble to our constitution starts with, quote, "We the people of India." The attackers have inserted an asterisk after the people of India to say that the people of India should mean the Hindus of India. Indians are not a uniform people. India is not a unitary state for democratic governance. India's history and constitution have created a federal structure. This federal structure, we all know, has been undermined. Between 2017 and now, in at least 4 states, nominated governors and defections helped the BJP to form governments, though the party lacked a majority in Goa and Manipur in 2017, in Karnataka in 2019, in Madhya Pradesh in 2020. The biggest attack on India's federal structure occurred in August 2019, when in a sudden overnight move, Jammu and Kashmir was not just taken over, it was split into 2 bits and then downgraded. A state enjoying significant autonomy was demoted into 2 union territories. Then there is Delhi, India's capital city territory. Last month, after a quick, short discussion, India's parliament approved the Modi government's decision to downgrade Delhi's elected government and compel it to carry out the wishes of the nominated lieutenant governor. Also diminished are the powers of India's parliament. Using its majority in both houses, the Modi government has enacted laws without discussion and by circumventing committees of parliament, as Anilji has pointed out already. This was the case with the farm laws, which farmers across India have been opposing in winter and in summer for 7 months now. Attacks on democracy have not spared the once prestigious Election Commission. In the current cycle of elections, while Tamil Nadu held its election on a single day on the 6th of this month, West Bengal, with the population not very much larger, has its elections in 8 installments on 8 different days, starting with March 27 and ending with April 29. The BJP is a minor player in Tamil Nadu, but it's the chief challenger in West Bengal to Mamata Banerjee. All know that the BJP has advanced in West Bengal by scapegoating the 27% Muslim population of the state as anti-nationals. History tells us that power-loving, democracy-hating populists everywhere seeking legitimacy via the vote have always welcomed sympathetic election organizers. India's judiciary, this again Anilji has mentioned already, has also been under assault, including by temptation. As he mentioned, India's Supreme Court justices must retire at 4 months, at 65, but 4 months after Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi retired, in November 2019, he was nominated with his consent to the Rajya Sabha. Now, individual judges in India's judiciary have at times shown courage, but the Supreme Court has dodged critical issues, in some cases refusing even to hear the aggrieved. This happened, as everyone can recall, excuse me again, this has happened over the drastic change in Kashmir status and over new citizenship laws that discriminate on grounds of religion. Then there are the agencies that enforce income tax and foreign exchange laws, enforce laws against crime and corruption. A few days back, the Indian Express published a stunning list of raids by these agencies, all of them targeting opposition leaders. The report pointed out that in at least 2 instances, opposition politicians joined the BJP after their homes and offices were raided. More harrowing than anything else are the arrests and indefinite imprisonments of intellectuals, student leaders, union leaders, lawyers, and human rights activists, a great proportion of them Dalits, Muslims, Adivasis. The arrest and indefinite incarceration of Anand Teltumbde, Umar Khalid, and numerous others. In their overcrowded spaces, these prisoners are now threatened by COVID. Equally harrowing are the numerous attacks in India's streets, lanes, and fields on vulnerable individuals, most of them Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims. The pattern is consistent. Victims, if they remain alive, will be pursued by the police for allegedly violating some law. Attackers will remain free and will remain bold. Top leaders will remain silent, and judges will usually refuse to intervene, citing 2 words that can justify any oppressive deed: national security. Now, the United States too has its supremacists, its foes of equality. However, there's a crucial difference. When blatant injustice occurs in the US, influential voices speak out. The media report. Intellectuals write. Many in the dominant group side with the oppressed. Often, if not always, partly, if not wholly, sooner or later, some justice is rendered in the United States. In today's India, such mercies are rare. I've been a journalist for good chunks of my life. Often in India's modern history, the media has highlighted and probed attacks on the weak. It has spoken up for liberty, equality, dignity. No longer, except for a few brave newspapers and outlets. On India's TV channels, oppressors receive more generosity than the oppressed. Then there is the transmission into the Indian home and into the Indian mind via technology and social media of ill will, suspicion, and hate directed at the country's Muslim minority. We blame, despise, ill-treat, punish people, not for what they have done, but for who they are. In some parts, the project to inject hate has been so successful as to make state-supported mob violence a winning electoral strategy, at least for the short run. Now, Hindu nationalism is not a new ideology. Its believers have been active in India for a century. From 1920, they kept mostly aloof from the freedom struggle. After freedom, they were marginalized for 6 decades. The Indian mind was gripped by Gandhi, by Nehru, by Ambedkar, by ideas of equality and individual liberty. Now the Hindu nationalists think their time has come. They think the world is more open than ever before to the ideas of supremacy, that democracy and equality have had their day. Hindu nationalism has entered India's school textbooks, India's movies. Public universities are increasingly governed by Hindu nationalists. Supremacy for the dominant seems to be some kind of a global trend. Luckily for the world, The US has validated democracy afresh, although it continues to face tough challenges. More than a century ago, a young man called Bhimrao Ambedkar came from India to the US, to Columbia University in New York. He went on to confront India's oppressions, divides, and hierarchies. He made history. There are young Indians today, including in the US and in other lands outside India, apart from India itself, who dream big, who think deeply and truthfully. If they want, they can demand that today's India looks honestly at itself and comes out of the prison of oppression and hate. I know it, all of us know it. India's story has not ended. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's dream is not dead. On India's good earth, which has seen and is seeing so much suffering, a day will come when liberty, equality, friendship, and dignity break free from their chains.
Thank you, Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi. Overthrowing high-handed regimes is never easy. Democracy is becoming a mogocracy as a Hindu majoritarian, Hindutva nationalist kind of narrative. It took Jayaprakash Narayan ji to overthrow the Congress regime, which had imposed emergency. What we have is an undeclared emergency today. What will it take? Who will be our next Jayaprakash Narayan? What will it take to overthrow this regime? Your thoughts, sir.
Well, I'm looking at Anil, and I think Anil will be one of those next leaders. Let me continue this. You ask a very important question, but I think I will here cite Babasaheb Ambedkar, who asked the people of India not to look for heroes, not to hero worship, not to look for some great Messiah who will come and transform the scene. We in India now must not look for some great miracle worker. You and I, Bana Jyotsna, Ramaji, of course, and others, and it's especially important that all the oppressed sections come together. And all who feel the wounds of oppression will also rise and stand with them. So yes, it's good to look for a change and to burn for a change, but not to look for some great miracle worker. It is up to each and every one of us, and our bonds, our solidarity will achieve some great things.
Thank you, Rajmohanji. If I may ask one more question. You referred to white supremacy. The Hindutva ideology, the Brahminism, the Aryan theory, some of those theories are very similar or same to white supremacy. You also referred to the textbooks entering Indian school curriculum wherein these things are being taught. We have had some battles, similar battles here in California, which we lost, unfortunately. We see a lot of Indians joining the Biden administration. What will it take that these Indians who are joining, we of course welcome all of that, but they shouldn't represent what Hindutva ideology is kind of trying to talk. Biden administration is of course very occupied fighting the white supremacy. How do we make sure that the Indians who are joining or becoming leaders in US, the Brahminism, the Hindutva ideology doesn't take root? We see the signs already. How do we prevent that?
This is a very important question for all of us who may be living in the United States at the present time of Indian origin. This is a battle to influence one another inside even families. I know that in many families there are deep, deep divisions, and some people strongly for the Hindutva thing, and others are extremely unhappy about it, and they want equality and they want democracy. We have to be very clear, very firm. We may have more allies than we suspect. And many who claim to be strong Hindu nationalists, if you really probe them, they have many doubts. They know, for instance, that they come from India, and within a few weeks and months, they expect in the United States to have full rights, not only to have a vote, but even to become vice president or to become president. But Dalits in India, or Muslims in India, or Adivasis in India, who've been there for centuries and centuries, in many cases for thousands of years, before maybe anybody else, they have to be suppressed. So the inconsistency is so profound. Now I have not myself had the chance to meet some of these Indians who are now in prominent positions in the Biden administration, but I do not at all assume that most of them are inclined to or committed to the Hindutva ideology. I assume that I start with the belief that they are passionately for equality and for democracy, and if they are not, then directly, indirectly, through lobbying, through public statements, we must confront them.
Thank you, Rajmohan, Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi. My next question is for Banajyotsna Lahiri. Umar Khalid is a hero. You are also from JNU, he is also from JNU. JNU students, the university itself is despised by the current regime. And of course, some of them call it secular and whatnot, what names. How do we make sure that the spirit of JNU is spread amongst our students, youngsters? That alone probably has a power to overthrow current regimes. How do we do that? How do we spread the JNU spirit amongst our young?
See, when we say the spirit of JNU, as I have seen in my 9 years of JNU, what comes to my mind, first of all, is the power to question, never to shy away from questioning the powers that be, and to debate. You know, it's like, it's not that JNU, everyone in JNU is a leftist. There are many forces within JNU, including very right-wing people also. I mean, when we were students also, there were right-wing people, there were Ambedkarite forces, there were leftists, there were ultra-leftists, there were Gandhian forces, there were people who were not engaged or not subscribed openly to any kind of ideology. But what we always saw is the, battling of ideas. Like, that is very, very important. And the right to dissent, the idea that, I can disagree with you and we can still be in the same space. I will disagree with your politics completely, but it's not like I'm going to shut anyone up with sheer muscle power. That I'm not going to do. Therefore, in the elections of student politics and or elections of JNU, money and muscle power was never an issue, because people knew that if I flaunt money, I'm not going to get votes. People are only going to laugh at me. If someone, like it happened, the election that used to happen in Delhi University, people will get out in flashy cars, Lamborghinis and Mercedes-Benz, and the candidate's credentials will be determined by how much money you can spend. If you try to do that in JNU, people will laugh. If someone gets a Mercedes-Benz and tries to, contest election, people will laugh. And that was the thing that in JNU, that you choose your politics, you debate your politics, you change your politics, you evolve. Now, obviously, that is what hurts the ruling regime the most. That is why the attack on JNU 5 years back, when it happened, was specifically on this, on the act of dissent, on that this is a wastage of taxpayers' money, despite the fact that in their evaluation done by the MHRD. We don't subscribe to that, or we don't see that those are very great evaluations. But in their own evaluations, JNU have always been a top university and academically performing well. And despite that, to say that, you know, this is taxpayers' money. And one more great thing about JNU is definitely the resistance to privatization, that affordable education, the idea of social justice, the idea of gender justice. All these things are idea of JNU. So therefore, I don't think that, you know, take it to the masses in a way. I would say after the attack that happened on JNU, actually more people started talking about JNU, and that was a good thing that happened. In many universities, there actually started debate that whether this is a good thing, whether this is a bad thing, whether it's actually a wastage of taxpayers' money or not. And the student youth movement since 2016, like I earlier also said, that it did not start with JNU. It actually started with after Rohit Vemula's institutional murder, and the student protest that has started had continued. And right now we have seen very, very huge protests even in JNU. Last year, there was a horrific attack on the JNU students and teachers, that goons from outside came, masked goons, and, you know, actual physical attack on students and teachers took place last year, 5th of January, 2020. So that means that they are still scared of JNU, because in between there had been huge movements against privatization, against fee hike, and that is not confined to JNU itself. So the idea of JNU is basically this resistance to privatization of education, the upholding of social justice, upholding of gender justice, and a right and responsibility to debate, to dissent. So that I believe has always been the spirit of students' movement in India. And that will go on. And all I can see is that we saw the same spirit during the anti-CAA protests also. Like the idea, the kind of late night debate discussions that we used to have in JNU, I saw the same thing happening in Shaheen Bagh. I saw the same thing happening in Mumbai Bagh, in you know, Bangalore's Bilal Bagh. It was the same kind of atmosphere. It felt very JNU at that point of time, when these 24/7 protests in various places that were taking place, because it was like that. People were all out on the streets at night, women, men sitting together, having lots of chai and discussing, you know, debating on Marx, Ambedkar, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh. And so obviously the spirit of JNU is getting universalized, no matter how much they try to suppress it.
Thank you very much. There should be many more JNUs. The spirit of debate on the university campuses must be there. There should be many more Shaheen Baghs wherein people are coming together. It was very nice that when we recreated a Shaheen Bagh here in Atlanta, taking 1,200 people gathered, people from Florida by buses came here for the anti-CAA protest. It was heartwarming. It was beautiful. So let there be more JNUs, and the spirit of debate continues, which is what this government, the current regime, is afraid of.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Bana Jyotsna ji. Mrs. Rama Teltumde, what is your message? What would you like? How can we help? What will be the message for the young Indians in say US and back in India?
मुझे तो ऐसे लगता है कि जो इंडिया में चल रहा है, जो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन चल रहा है, जो डिसेंट के अगेंस्ट चल रहा है, उसे सपोर्ट देना चाहिए। और जो ये लोग कर रहे हैं दलित आदिवासी लोगों के लिए, उनको भी सपोर्ट मिलना चाहिए, ऐसे मुझे लगता है।
Thank you very much, Ramaji. I had a pleasure of meeting Dr. Anand Teltumde back in Bangalore when he had come for his book, Republic of Caste, and we had good debates over 2 days for a couple of hours meeting in IIM Bangalore campus. We sincerely wish Anand, who is a tall intellectual in general, and we are very proud of, as a Dalit, we are proud of Dr. Anand. Hope he comes out sooner. Thank you all the panelists and the people who are listening in for coming together on this platform. granddaughter of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the chief architect of Indian Constitution. Mr. Rajmohan Gandhi, grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, and Bana Jyotsna ji for coming onto this forum and celebrating Ambedkar Jayanti uniquely by debating, by discussing the current challenges, the way current regime is taking the Hindutva ideology, and the way we want to bring the spirit of secularism back in the Indian masses. With that, if anybody wants to speak, but I would like to conclude. Thank you very much. Jai Bhim.